After everyone on Myung-sung Hospital's team that's participating enters, other players start to come on the court and play with the ball, or just stroll around. The speakers announces that the competition is about to start. Those who wish to participate in the competition, and those who want to watch, should gather inside the basketball court. Throughout all this, Sung-woo is nervous and is sighing a lot. The protagonist noticed this. He says it's finally starting, and Sung-woo responds saying he's nervous. We get to see the mental state of the other therapists. One is wallowing in despair in the corner. The other is panicking because he didn't know it was such a big competition. And Dong-sik is trembling and gaslighting himself into thinking that they can do it. They then start repeating to their one another how nervous they are, while Dong-sik gives false hope that they just need to do their best, which leaves the protagonist wondering if it'll be okay. The director, Ju, and the two chiefs approaches them on the court, calling for everybody. They all instantly bowed and greeted the director, except for the protagonist. While surprising Sung-woo, the director thanks them for taking time to do this on their day off. He then excitedly says now that they're all gathered like this, they look and feel like real players, and they should give it their all. He then gathers them in a circle and tells them not to get hurt, and do their best. He tells them to put their hands together, and they do so. They then call the name of their team, and cheered. The game then begins with the basketball being flung in the air. Dong-sik quickly grabs it before the other player and passes it to the protagonist. The protagonist rushes with the ball and makes a quick score, which makes the audience cheer in excitement and surprise. Both the protagonist and another therapist compliments Dong-sik on his quick and smooth pass. We get to see that the protagonist's team score is 2 and 0 for the other team with one set. As the game goes on, Sung-woo tries to go for a 3-point shot, but they blocked it, which annoys him. He tries to go for another one, but it's blocked again. The protagonist sees that he's disappointed and annoyed, so he tells him to don't mind it, and they should focus on defense. As the game goes on, the other team continues to score, even occasionally knocking over some of the players on the protagonist's side. We see that the score of the other team has far surpassed the protagonist's team, with the protagonist's team having 7 score, while the other team having a whooping 34 in the second set. We see that everybody moral is down at timeout. Sung-woo curses at how good they are. One therapist agrees with Sung-woo and asks how can they shoot while the wheel is still spinning, while the other says their level is almost like that of a circus. The protagonist quickly realizes that everyone's morale has hit rock bottom in just the second quarter. We see that Sung-woo especially has taken a personal blow from this. The protagonist realizes and approaches Sung-woo and calls to him. Sung-woo answers yes, while pulling down the rag on his head. We see Magic Mouth activates, and the protagonist tells him that there are times when the shot goes in and times when it doesn't, telling Sung-woo that he used to have a really high success rate, so he shouldn't feel pressured. Just throw it when the opportunity comes, and remember that the main character of the game is him. The protagonist then tells him that they should go. We see that what the protagonist told him has brightened up his mood. The protagonist wonders to himself that if it was the power of the magic mouth that Sung-woo's gaze changed. We see that on set 3, the protagonist's team score is 21, and the other team's score is 53. The protagonist thought to himself that the third quarter is almost over, but the opponent has a 30-point lead. He then decides to try something else. We see him staying still with the ball while the other players rush him. He then puts up his finger signaling to Dong-sik, and they both agree to something. The protagonist then calls for one of the other therapists while being chased and passed the ball. The therapist catches the ball while the protagonist tells the therapists to protect the one with the ball. We see that they've successfully blocked 2 of the other team's players. The other team shouts that they're going for the 3-point shot. The other team players intercepts the therapist with the ball, cutting him off. He then passes the ball to Sung-woo. As he heads for the net, the other team shouts saying block him and get ready for the rebound. While in the moment, Sung-woo wonders to himself if he'll be able to do it, and his shoulders feel heavy. If he shoots and fail, what should he do then? The protagonist then calls out to him, telling him to finish it all the way. As he makes the shot, he remembers what the protagonist told him. It doesn't matter whether we win or lose. What's important is that you're not giving up. The ball then lands straight in the net, giving them a score. Sung-woo then cries out for the shot. As the protagonist is relieved that Sung-woo's not pressured anymore, the other therapists rush to Sung-woo praising him for the shot. We then see the third set. The protagonist's team score is 32, while the other team's score is 58. That's where the third quarter ends. It's now the fourth quarter, We see Dong-sik and another therapist surrounding a player with the ball and trying to take it. We see that the score is 39 for the protagonist's team and 54 for the other team. One of the therapists thinks to himself that it can't go on like this. Someone has to step up, confidently thinking that it has to be him. While Sung-woo is confused as to what he's thinking, we see him rushing for the net which two players are guarding. We hear a crash sound which surprises the protagonist's team and the other team. We see the therapist lying on the ground motionless. The team calls out to him and gather around him, and he still lay there motionless. As the staffs take him away, he apologizes and says he really tried to do well, telling them that he'll entrust everything to them. We see that they look sorry for him. Even Sung-woo feels sorry for him. One of the therapists then points out that since he leaves, they'll be short of one person. The protagonist says that's why they prepared a sixth man in the team. We see that the slacker himself is doing what he does best, slacking off. One therapist asks if that's the substitute. Dong-sik answers saying he's assistant team leader of Ward 1, and we see that Sung-woo feels unpleasant about him joining. The protagonist shouts at him to get ready quickly, which startles him. In return, he points at himself asking if they mean him. As he gets on the court, he thinks to himself, I can do it as well. Isn't it just about rolling the wheel and throwing the ball well? Smirking to himself and thinking that this is an opportunity for him to carry the game and put the protagonist to shame, we see him imagining himself making a shot, which gets the crowd uproar, thinking that he'll make the manager and director acknowledge him. We see him arrogantly smiling away in the middle of the game, saying pass the ball to him and he'll show everybody how it's done. A few moments later, we see his face full of despair. The score is now 42 for the protagonist's team and 84 for the other team. We see them gathered for a little break. They criticize Kang Dong-ho that he talks big but plays like garbage. The protagonist chimes in saying that's just how he is, and they should do well themselves, adding that he should have come to practice often. They didn't even see his face during practice. Kang Dong-ho points at the protagonist and shouts that if he knew he was going to play, does he think he wouldn't have practiced? As the protagonist is trying to communicate with Kang Dong-ho, Dong-sik says that there's an old saying that when 5 people gather, there is always one who's trash. Sung-woo agrees that it's a famous saying but asks who said it. Dong-sik surprisingly asks if Sung-woo is from a generation that doesn't know that. And in return, Sung-woo laughs and calls him an old man. While all that is happening, the protagonist is thinking to himself that he didn't expect much, but with Kang Dong-ho's skill looking like that, thinking that him and Dong-sik will open the way and let Sung-woo do the shoots, as the game is about to start again. He thought to himself to give it a try. Winning or losing isn't important to Sung-woo. It's the feeling of giving your best. We see someone taking the ball from Kang Dong-ho. The protagonist ends up getting the ball while thinking that the feeling of believing in possibilities and having hopeful expectations, as long as all that effort is felt in Sung-woo's heart. The protagonist then raises his finger and calls for Dong-sik, Sung-woo, and the other therapist. The 3 of them nods in agreement. The protagonist passes the ball to Dong-sik. Dong-sik then holds aggro, and the other players flock to him. He shouts that he got blocked, calls for Sung-woo, and passes the ball to Sung-woo. The other players swarm Sung-woo, saying to stop him and stick close. We see that he's terrified of how much they're swarming him. The protagonist shouts to him that he can do it. The second starts counting down till the end. Sung-woo makes his shot while the other players try to catch it. But it successfully lands, and they get an extra 2 points. We see that everybody is gathered together and tired. Kang Dong-ho asks if everybody had a hard time, saying that even though it's a bit disappointing that they lost, they did lose gracefully. They lost, but they fought well. They all just stare at him without saying anything. He once again asks if everybody is feeling tired, saying it's their fault for playing too hard. They should have played the game casually like him. The protagonist replied to him saying that it might be a meaningless thing that only gets him a vacation. But before he could finish, Kang Dong-ho cuts him off and places his hand on his shoulder, saying he's too immersed in it, asking if he finds himself cool and all. If he's dissatisfied, he should have worked harder. The protagonist slaps his hand off his shoulder and says he can't get through to him. Kang Dong-ho angrily says how dare he treat him that way. The protagonist then approaches Sung-woo. Sung-woo thought to himself that if he had done better, maybe they would have still been in the game, thinking that there were 5 opportunities for him to score a point in the middle game, but all of them failed. The protagonist tells him that he did a good job on the game, and he replied saying the same to him, adding that if they were going to lose like this, he guessed he should have just not done it. The protagonist can only call his name in pity. We also see that his hands are shaking. He continues to say that everyone is busy, and yet they gathered for hours to practice because of him. And the score difference is as much as 40 points. He feels like he played horribly, like he came out for no reason. The protagonist responds saying it's true that they all did it for his sake, but he must not think that was all to it. Sung-woo asks what he mean. The protagonist then tells him to look over to the seats. We see Dong-sik and a therapist sitting, laughing and chatting with a phone together. Dong-sik says that he's glad there are no major injuries. The other therapist agrees, but then asks, why did the other therapist went and fell down and quit on us? The therapist that quit is the one on the phone. He calls them noisy. The protagonist then asks Sung-woo, how can people who were compelled to volunteer still laugh after losing? Sung-woo can only stare in surprise. The protagonist adds that they all had Kong Dong-ho the troll, but they did well until the end, and Sung-woo agreed, all while Kong Dong-ho scratches his ear and wonders to himself who's talking about him. Sung-woo then accepted that he did his best, but wonders if something like this will happen to him again, because they did their best and still lost. So maybe it was meaningless. The protagonist then reminds him that what's important isn't winning or losing. Sung-woo finishes his sentence saying, do your best and enjoy it to the fullest right. He's heard it so much that he's almost sick of it now. As he says this, we see that his face has brightened up. The protagonist pats his head while saying, that's right, and you're all grown up now. Sung-woo says he talks like a geezer now. The protagonist then tells him that they should go because the others prepared a party. Sung-woo tells him to wait. He then throws the ball while the protagonist thought to himself that somehow it felt like he realized something at that time. The reason he has the system, and what he should do as a therapist in the future. We see that Sung-woo lands the shot. He tells the protagonist that he has something he wants to do. The protagonist looks at him and thought to himself that he has something he wants to do too. He then compliments Sung-woo's throw and says they should go for real. Sung-woo agrees and says he's hungry. A system window pops up saying, all conditions for the quest throw towards the dream have been completed. You receive 2 level-up vouchers as a reward. Well, this is where this video ends. If you enjoyed and wish to see more, then please leave a like and hit the subscribe button and leave a feedback. Thank you.